Let me start with what President Trump is saying now. He is talking about having the U.S. economy open up by Easter, which gives us about 3 weeks from now. Does this make sense when you think about cause and effect? The virus is the problem, and stopping the virus creates long-term benefit, but at the expense of a lot of short-term pain. Where do you stand on this debate?
I think the question of how long the containment measure should be is probably best left to people in the medical profession, to epidemiologists, to get a sense of how this virus spreads. It is quite clear that very strong containment measures can help, and we saw this in China. But there is tremendous uncertainty still about how all of this will evolve. Even if you do contain it now, does it come back with a lag? So I think there is a lot to learn here, and I mean, countries will have to arrive at their own judgment about how long they plan to have these containment measures in place. There is a clear cost for the economy, but at the same time, people's lives are involved, and so they will have to each individually look at their specific circumstances and decide what's the best approach.
So, Gita, I mean, we're obviously, far from being out of the woods here. We still have a lot of countries that still haven't even begun to see what would probably end up being the peak exposure to this. We heard from the IMF managing director yesterday, and in her letter, she talked about how 80 countries had already approached the IMF for some sort of financial assistance to deal with the economic fallout. I'm wondering whether you can give us sort of an update as to what these countries are asking for and what the IMF is prepared to do to stem the economic issues here.
Indeed. I mean, there are many countries, and the number you mentioned was 80, but there are many countries, especially if you look at low-income countries, that have an immediate need for debt relief. They have immediate need for financing just to provide the appropriate healthcare services that they should be. And so the IMF has many tools that it can provide. We have funds for providing debt relief from, for payments that's owed to the IMF. We have rapid financing facilities. In addition, we have $1 trillion lending capacity that countries can have access to, our membership can have access to. So we have many tools in place. I think there will be even more that's needed in terms of a global response, and we are working with our membership and with other IFIs to come up with the best response here.
Yeah, certainly trying times for the new leadership of the IMF. I think about how Kristalina Georgieva has just been on the job for, under 6 months, and you come to this as well. How are you guys handling this? I mean, how are you thinking through some of your objectives? Do you have to put on hold some of the things that you were planning on working on in order to work through this period first? I just want to get a sense of what this means for your workflow, what this means for the priorities that you had set in place when you began the job.
I think what this means for our workflow is everything gets a second seat, a backseat, and all hands are on deck on dealing with COVID-19 and the crises around it. It also means that we are talking to epidemiologists, we are talking to people in the medical profession. This is not something typically economists do, but this is such a unique crisis. The impact on global activity that we're seeing, we know where it comes from. It's from a shutdown. Countries are shutting down for periods of time, and this is what we should see. But again, to come up with our forecast and projections, we also have to think about how this virus will play out, how these containment measures will, how well will they work, and how these policies that are being put in place. So it's a big change, and not to miss the fact that we have to deal with all of this while we cannot all be in the same place. So we're all working remotely from home, and that's an added challenge.
So, Gita, I mean, when we talk about, though, the mechanics of what we've been seeing across financial markets worldwide and really the outflows that we've seen out of emerging markets, as well as just a lot of the funding stresses that we've seen with regards to the dollar and sort of how that matches up with all of those foreign currencies out there. We've gotten a little bit of reprieve today from that in the markets. But I'm wondering, is there anything that the IMF can do to maybe sort of arrest this imbalance that we're seeing between the strength of the dollar and what emerging markets are going to need to sort of stay stable, if not solvent?
So dollar liquidity has been a big challenge. The U.S. Fed has provided the swap line facility to now 9 countries, and that helps tremendously, but it's not going to be enough. There are going to be more countries that will need access to dollar liquidity. And at the IMF, we are indeed thinking about what will be the best way of providing this kind of liquidity. Now, we just have to keep in mind is that we don't want countries being pushed from having liquidity problems to having solvency problems. And we want to be in a scenario where once we have positive news on the medical front, once we have positive news on the containment front, these countries can recover very quickly. Now, there have been episodes, for instance, for the Ebola crisis in Liberia, where it took a very long time for countries to come back up, and they still haven't returned back to trend. So that's the kind of situation we want to avoid, and we are working very hard on that.
Yeah, there's certainly a very thin line between liquidity and solvency. Gita, China is slowly getting back to normal and reopening its economy. It was certainly an engine that helped keep the global economy from sinking further in 2008. Do you see China playing that role once again this time around?
There was a big hit to activity in China in the first quarter. That means there will be a big hit to activity overall for China for 2020. We are seeing signs of recovery in China. They're coming back to much higher levels of capacity utilization. But this is a difficult time. I mean, this is a time when every country in the world is just literally shutting down for a few weeks, at least at the minimum, and that's not going to be easily solved with just one country doing a massive fiscal stimulus.